Hey guys, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install the SeeLeveL 2 tank monitoring system here on our 2020 Taxa Mantis Travel trailer. So with our neighbor today, they have this Taxa Mantis. It came with some water tanks, but these water tanks have no sensor. So he has no idea when he's filling up his fresh tank until the water comes spurting back out at him. So instead of dealing with that or dealing with his gray tank overflowing, he wanted us to put in the SeeLeveL 2 tank monitoring system. That way he can easily just press a button and know exactly where he's at. As you can see, this is super simple to work. If you press your battery button, you can see exactly what your battery is reading at. If you click on your fresh tank, well, you can see that we're at 5% right now. I didn't put that much water in. And then with our gray tank, I don't have anything in that yet, so it's still sitting at 0. On our black, just because we don't have a black tank on this, it's going to read open because there's not actually a sensor running over to the black. But there's no option in the monitors for just gray and fresh. So this is going to be the closest option for us. If you have other things like a LP tank monitor that you want to have put on here, or if you want to have your water pump also on here, there are other monitors that are going to come with the switches so that you can check all that as well. But in our case, this is what we needed for our neighbor today. So on your strip, you're going to notice that there's each of these little sensors with a break in between it. These are where you can actually cut through and change the length of the strip. Like I said before, during the installation, you don't want to actually cut through the sensor because that's going to ruin that sensor right there. But the way that this works is while it's stuck onto the side of your tank, it's going to sense the water to air displacement as it moves around in your tank, and then know exactly where it is on each of these sensors. That way you get a way more accurate reading than just your simple probe, where it's the 1, 2, 3, or empty kind of system. So this gives you a much, much clearer picture. Obviously, as you start cutting these down though, these are going to be less sensitive. On ours today, we only were able to put 3 on our gray tank. So this is going to be just a simple 1, 2, 3 on just that specific tank. But on the fresh, we were able to put 5. So we have no issue there. We're getting a whole lot better of a reading. Obviously, if you have a much larger tank, you're going to have a way better reading on it, and you're going to know precisely where you're at. So the installation difficulty for this system is going to vary depending on what kind of setup you have. With ours here, it was super simple to run the lines. If you are in a camper that already has water sensors, it's real easy. You just cut right into those lines like I did in a different video for one of our other models of this product. So all in all, it is a very simple thing. Your hardest time is really just going to be running lines if you're doing a fresh build. So for a fresh build like we're going to be doing on our Mantis today, you're going to need to lay out your kit. We have our monitor. We're only going to be using our gray tank and our fresh tank just because this doesn't have a black tank on it, but this is the closest monitor to what we need. And because of that, we're not going to need our third strip either, but what we are going to need are some ring terminals because we're going to ground our grounds on our strips right to the frame, and then we're also going to need some wire. We're going to run that from our sensor up into our trailer so that we can have it connect to our monitor. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to cut down our strips because these are obviously just too long for our tanks. So what we're going to do is hold it up, and it looks like we're at like 3.5 sensors. So we're only going to be able to do 3 because you can't cut in the middle of a sensor. It's got these little lines right here of where you can actually cut. So we're going to go ahead and we'll cut down our strip. And then since this is our gray tank, we're going to cut the little GRY gray Cinder. That way we know on our monitor what we're actually sensing. We can go ahead, remove our backing, place it on our tank. And we want to make sure that we're getting a nice snug fit on our tank. As you can see how the manufacturer molded the top portion and the bottom portion of the gray tank here together. They have this bump that's going the whole length of the tank. So we really need to make sure that we're pressing down, getting our sensor completely on here and sticking. That way it actually makes full contact with our tank so it knows exactly where the water level's at. So the black wire on our SeeLeveL sensors, we're going to strip back the casing on that. Because we're going to ground this straight up to the frame. I'll twist that up a little bit and then I'll fold it over, get a little bit thicker. We can stick on our ring terminal. Go ahead and crimp it down. Now that we have a ring terminal on, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a self-tapper to drill right into the frame, and then we can ground our sensor. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on our freshwater tank. This one's a little bit more forgiving. We got an extra 2 sensors that we can put on here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut right through. And we can take the backing off of our sensor and place it on our tank. When placing it on the tank, the manufacturer does recommend leaving about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch space above and below the sensor, which we're going to be pretty much on. And just like before, this also has that bead right in the center. So you're going to want to make sure you really press it down, get a nice tight seal against the tank. One other thing I forgot to mention is if your tanks are pretty dirty, you're going to want to wipe those down with some soap and water. Luckily for us, our Mantis today had pretty clean tanks, so we didn't have to. One other thing I did want to mention is also that because this is our fresh, we didn't have to cut any tabs up on our sensor. If you leave them all intact, it's going to automatically know that this is the fresh tank. So now we can go ahead, we're going to do the same thing we did on the other one. We're going to cut back our casing on our ground wire. We can then crimp on a ring terminal. And then we can ground it into our frame. Alright, now that we have our grounds on both of our sensors in place, we're going to go ahead and run some wiring from our blue wire on our rear sensor over to my other sensor, and then I'm going to run that up into our Mantis so that we can have it connect with our monitor. This is going to be a little bit of time-consuming work just because we're going to try and trace around and go through the holes that are already in our frame. That way we stay away from any moving parts or any parts that are going to be generating any heat. So we can start by cutting back a little bit of our casing here and then crimping on some fresh wire. Like I said, we're just going to be crimping on some extra wire. I'm going to be using a heat shrink butt connector just because we're going to be outside of the trailer here. So with our wire traced through over to our other sensor, I'm going to go ahead and snip it right where these are going to meet. Give us a little bit extra just in case. So we'll cut it right about here. Then we can go ahead and strip back the casing. Then we can go ahead and strip back the casing on our sensor wire. And then what we're going to do is twist these two together. And then we're going to crimp on a heat shrink butt connector. So now we're going to take some additional wire and we're going to put that in the other end of our butt connector and then run that up into our trailer up to our monitor. We're also going to heat this up, shrink down our butt connector. With that all connected, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use a zip tie to kind of hold our wires tight to our other wires on here, keep them from dangling down at all, and we're going to trace this up into the trailer. So the next thing we're going to do is worry about our placement for our monitor. For our neighbor today, they want it right about here. I'm going to try and center it, make it look nice. And then we're also going to have to check on the inside of our cabinet here, make sure that we're not going to be getting in the way of anything or not having enough room to put on our wiring harness. So right about there is about where we're going to have to be. So what I already did was I cut out a piece of tape that's the same size as the inside of our monitor here that's going to sit inside of our cabinet. That way I can easily just cut out this space. So now we can go ahead and just start making our cutout. On our wiring harness, we're going to have 4 wires. We have our red, which is our power, our black, which is our ground, our blue, which is going to be our signal wire, which is the wire that we ran under the trailer already, and then our orange one here, which is an optional indicator or alarm. So if you wanted to run a little light or anything to kind of indicate whenever one of your tanks is full, you could go ahead and run this up to a light. For our neighbor today, we're not going to be doing that. So like I said, this is just optional. If you don't use it, you can just leave it as it is or cut it off if you don't plan on ever using it. I'm just going to leave it on there just in case down the road maybe they do want to add in a LED light to kind of indicate whenever one of their tanks is either full or empty. Normally you'd be wiring this either to like a battery disconnect or straight up to your battery, because this is going to run off a 12 volt DC power. We lucked out, we have a distribution panel for our DC side right under where we're mounting our monitor. So I'm going to run it from our wiring harness straight down there. So I'm not actually going to have to use any extra wire. I'm just going to need to clip on a Spade terminal. So I'll go ahead and we'll put this on right now, just to kind of give you an idea. So this would have a Spade terminal onto it, and then we're going to come right down to one of these open positions right on here. So we can take our crimper or wire cutters, strip back our casing. I am taking off quite a bit extra because I'm going to fold this up and then twist it just to kind of give it a little bit thicker of a gauge, just because this is such a small wire. We can put on our Spade terminal, crimp that down. And then we will fish it down into our open switch. It feels like we got one right here. So now our power is good to go on our wiring harness. For our ground, it's a little short. I am going to go ahead and just add just a little bit extra wire. I don't want this being too tight and anything's yanking on it and doing any damage to the wiring. Right here we have a bus bar that's acting as our ground. While every terminal is being used, we are going to be able to just butt up 2 ring terminals together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Now the last wire that we're going to do anything with is going to be our blue wire. Like I said, that is our communication wire. We're just going to connect that to the white wire that we ran under the trailer to our strips. So typically you'd want to mount this right away, just because I wanted to make sure everything worked first. I went ahead and we wired everything, and now we can go ahead and test it. So we don't actually have any water in our fresh or our gray tank, but you can see sensors are reading 0. One way to really test how this is working is to check our battery, which is reading 12.6. And as you can see on our distribution panel down here, it's also reading 12.6, so we know that it's accurate. So now that we know that this is working, we can go ahead and I'm going to mount this in place using some wood screws. Alright, so we actually went and filled up our fresh tank quite a bit. Go ahead and hit our button right now to test it out. And it's showing that we're at 50% of our tank right now. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to run a little bit more water into our sink and then have it show you what our gray water is going to be at once that water drains down through our plumbing. Well, I think that about does it for today's installation of the SeeLeveL 2 tank monitoring system here on our Taxa Mantis Travel trailer. My name's Kevin. Thanks for watching.